that a beautiful song from Eitan Katz. Chazdei Hashem, the kindnesses of Hashem. And I realized I got so caught up in listening to it that I didn't share our broadcast to the groups because Nina's still away, delivering our daughter to college. So just quickly doing that, and then I can start welcoming everybody, lighting up the darkness as we do so. Okay, share it to the forum. Share it to Torah Lessons to Help Our Lives. Come on, come on, come on. And share it to A Daily Dose of Talmud. Okay. That should be good. All right, who's with us? Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy in North Carolina, James in Indianapolis, Yehud in South Carolina, Mickey in New Jersey, Renee in Indiana, Paul in Minneapolis, Paul in Chicago, Ira in South Carolina. I can't read that. Rochelle is with us. Nicholas in Oregon. Ruth in Kentucky. Lewis in Northern California. Bella in Florida. John in Maine. Tanya says hello. Lucy's in Minnesota. And Mickey says the sound is great. Thank God. It's like I'm so tired of the tech difficulties. It seems like everything's working. Clarice in Mexico City, bienvenida. Bill in mid-Missouri, right? George in Pasadena. Tanya in Wilmette. Sam in New Mexico. Aoife in Florida. Marjorie in Virginia. Ms. Michelle Rice in Washington State. Marie says shalom. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to have you with us. Okay. Chazdei Hashem, the kindnesses of Hashem. Eitan Katz just belts that out, and we all should, right? Say, thank you, Hashem. I love you, Hashem. You can say that all day long. You never say it enough. Okay. We are holding on page 50. Page 50, Daf Nun, here in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 4, working our way through Mishnah number 6, finally getting into the actual rights and obligations of the spouses as detailed in the Ketubah. And lots of interesting digressions. We picked this up near the top of 50a. Yesterday we saw that there's a difference between an obligation, something that in a particular situation you have to do and the court will make you do it, versus fulfilling a positive commandment. It's a commandment, you got to do it, but you don't have to necessarily create the situation in which you'll be able to fulfill the positive commandment, whereas an obligation is a little bit more far-reaching, particularly in that the court will step in and seize your assets if indeed you're obligated to support someone, like the estate is obligated to support the widow. Okay, we picked this up near the top of 50a. Apropos the ordinances instituted by the sages in Usha. So we were learning yesterday that if a father refused to support his child, they would step in and maybe not seize his assets, but embarrass the father until he starts supporting his child, because it's obviously what he ought to be doing. So as opposed to where we were in the law of the rapist and the seducer for all those weeks, and it was all hypothetical, really just extracting principles from that body of law. Here, when we're talking about a father supporting the child, we've seen lots of practical examples, real-world incidents. So apropos the ordinances instituted by the sages in the city of Usha, the Gemara cites another one. Rabbi Ilya said, in Usha, the sages instituted that one who dispenses his money to charity should not dispense more than 1/5. And this is actually quite right. This is the law. A Jew is obligated to give 10% of his income, his net income, to charity, and that's the right way to do it. And by the way, I talk about this a lot. Unless you're being very careful to give away 10% of your income and fulfill that commandment, odds are you're not giving away 10% of your income. I mean, it's like we overestimate in our minds how much we're giving away. Oh, yeah, I gave to this, I gave to that. I'm sure it adds up to 10%. Probably not. 10% is a lot of money. And the best way to make sure that you're doing it is that every time you receive income, you put it in your bank account, and right away you have a connected bank account, and you transfer 10% of what came in, boom, right over to the Meiser account, the charity account. And then, whether you're a very modest person or a very rich person, it's the same. You're a philanthropist. You've got an account, right? All the money in that account is charitable money, and it's your job to give away that money. Research your causes, give to causes that you really believe in. But once you set aside 10%, your tithe, into a separate account, then you're going to fulfill that commandment properly. How much is too much? That's what we're learning here. Interestingly, you think a super rich person, I think there's like these billionaires that are taking some kind of making a promise that they're going to give away half of their fortunes to charity. And indeed, a person who has a fortune that large, they can give away much more than 20% because they're still going to be billionaires, right? But for most people, for the vast majority, for the 99% of us, the sages would advise do not give more than 20%. Right? More than 20%, it might become an emotional thing for you. You want to give away so much, but you're giving away in a period in your life when you have so much to give away, and the rest of your life might not always be that way. So you have to protect yourself, right? So the minimum is 10% and the maximum is 20%. How do we know this? Here they're going to derive it for us. That opinion is also taught in a baraisa. One who scatters should not scatter more than 1/5, 20%, lest he render himself destitute and later need the help of other people. You don't want to become a charity case as you're giving charity. And an incident occurred involving a certain individual who sought to dispense more than 1/5 of his property as charity, and his friend did not let him act upon his wishes. And who was this friend? Rabbi Yeshivav. And some say that Rabbi Yeshivav was the one who wanted to give away too much of his assets to charity, and his friend did not let him do so. And who was the friend? Rabbi Akiva. Rav Nachman said, and some say it was Rav Acha Bar Yaakov who said, what is the verse that alludes to this maximum amount of charity? How can we learn this from the Torah? The sages are always going to base their teachings in the Torah, if at all possible. So what is the verse? Genesis 28:22. Jacob is speaking, and he says, and of all that you shall give me, I will surely give 1/10 of it. Aseh asreinu. Aser asreinu. Right? So Meiser, right, the giving of 1/10. That's why we call our charity accounts Meiser accounts. The verb is to tithe, meaning to give 1/10. Jacob, when he says he makes a deal, right, as he's fleeing from his brother's wrath, fleeing his parents' home, and he's going out on his own in the world, and he has that dream, right, the ladder in that spot where he has the ladder in his dream reaching up to heaven and the angels ascending and descending, etc. In that same place, he says to God, if you will take care of me and keep me safe, and I will return in one piece as I'm leaving in one piece, then I'm going to make a pledge to you, right? I'm going to live a righteous life, and specifically, I will give away 1/10. But when it says in the English translation, I will surely give, or I will give, indeed I will give, it's because in Hebrew the verb is being doubled, and so what it says is I will tithe, right? I will tithe the tithe, that kind of thing. And from that, the sages are saying, well, he says he's going to give away 1/10, but he's saying the 10th twice. Must be that he's giving 1/10 and 1/10, 20%, 1/5, right? That's how they learn it out. The double use of the verb that means to donate 1/10 indicates that Jacob, who issued this statement, was actually referring to 2/10, i.e. 1/5. So the Gemara asks, but the latter 10th is not similar to the first tenth. Now we're getting into a little bit of math. Don't get scared. As it would be 1/10 of what remained after the first tenth had been removed. So it's different. If you just take 20% of your $100, so you've taken $20. But if you take 10% out of your $100, so you took out $10, what remains? $90. If you then take 10% of that, is it $10? No, it would be $9. So a tenth and then a tenth would result in $19 given away. Simply taking out 20% would result in $20 being given away. So it's different. So the Gemara is asking, which is it? Are you giving away 20% or are you giving a tenth and then another tenth? So the Gemara answers that Rav Ashi said, since the verse could have said, I will surely give 1/10, aser ve'aser, aser aser, and instead it stated, I will a tenth of it give, it thereby alludes to the fact that the latter tenth is like the first one, and so they're saying, Jacob wasn't saying the maximum is $19 on 100, the maximum is a fifth, right? The maximum is 20%. And that's what the sages advise. Now, with regard to the above statements concerning the sages' ordinances in Usha, Rav Shimi bar Ashi said, and these laws continually decrease. The first statement was stated by Rabbi Ilya, quoting a statement by Reish Lakish in the name of Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. The second law was delivered by Rabbi Ilya in the name of Reish Lakish, while the third was taught by Rabbi Ilya without quoting another sage, right? So the chain of teacher to student is getting reduced as these teachings are given. The first one cites a teaching in the name of somebody, in the name of someone else. The second one in the name of someone. And the third, Rabbi Ilya just gives it in his own name. So what's going on? And this is your mnemonic for the order of these laws. Minors wrote and dispensed, and this alludes to the ruling requiring a father to support his children while they are minors, the ruling about one who wrote a document granting all of his property to his sons, and the ruling about one who dispenses large sums to charity. If you're trying to remember which of those Rabbi Ilya quoted in his own name, in the name of his teacher, and in the name of his teacher and his teacher's teacher, because you were memorizing the Talmud the way they used to, that would help you remember. New subject. Rav Yitzhak said, in Usha, the sages enacted that a person should treat his son gently, right? This is a digression. We were talking about the obligation of a father to support his daughter, and a statement and a law they made about that in the town of Usha. And once we learn that, we're learning about some other ordinances that came out in Usha. So Rav Yitzhak said, in Usha, the sages enacted that a person should treat his son gently, even if he does not want to study, until his son is 12 years old. And from this point forward, he harasses him in all aspects of his life in order to force him to study. You get the idea that while a kid is a child, if you force him to study Torah before he's ready, he's going to just develop a distaste for Torah, and it won't help him be a Torah scholar or even be a Torah Jew later in life. But once he becomes 12 years old, and at 13 he's going to be commanded in all the mitzvahs as an adult, then you start to harass the son to learn Torah. Now the Gemara asks, whoa. Is that so? But didn't Rav say that Rav Shmuel bar Shelat, didn't Rav say to Rav Shmuel bar Shelat, who taught children, with regard to a child less than 6 years old, do not accept him. Don't even take him as a student. It's too young. But if he is 6 years old, accept him and stuff him like an ox. I.e., just as an ox is force-fed, you should force the students to study Torah, presumably from the age of 6. And the Gemara answers, no. This is not a contradiction. Here, as yes, one must stuff him like an ox and teach him intensively. However, if the student refuses to learn, one does not harass him in all aspects of his life until after he is 12 years old. If he's ready to absorb that much material, teach it to him. But if he's not, then you don't. And if you wish, say that this is not difficult for a different reason. This law, which prescribes forcing the students to study from the age of 6, is referring to the Bible, whereas that law that one should not harass a boy to study until he is 12 is referring to the Mishnah. And the Bible, for all its depth, and obviously is endlessly deep, like an onion that endlessly unfolds, and turn it over and over and over, for everything is in it. But on the simple level, the Bible is easier to grasp than the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is easier to grasp than the Gemara. Even at its most basic level, right? It's much more complicated than the Bible, in the sense that the sages are arguing back and forth and making fine distinctions, and you really need to be a little bit older, more sophisticated before you're ready to learn that way. This is as Abaye said, my foster mother told me that a 6-year-old is ready for Bible study and a 10-year-old is mature enough to study Mishnah. Additionally, a 13-year-old is sufficiently developed to fast for 24 hours like any other adult on Yom Kippur. And as for a girl, she must start observing fasts when she is 12 years old, because girls mature faster than boys. Evidently. The Gemara cites another statement of Abaye in the name of his foster mother. This is one of those cases, right, where women are getting cited as sages in the Talmud. Abaye said, my mother told me that a 6-year-old child who is stung by a scorpion on the day that he completes 6 years will not live without emergency treatment. So what is his cure? The bile of a white vulture in beer. One should rub him with this mixture and make him drink it. And she further said to him, a 1-year-old child who is stung by a hornet on the day that he completes a year will not live without emergency treatment. And what is his cure? Palm tree fiber in water. Again, one should rub him with it and make him drink it. Presumably you would keep these remedies on hand. If you didn't, it'd be hard to get it quickly. Rav Katina said, anyone who brings his son to school when he is younger than 6 years old will run after him and not catch him. In other words, he will worry about his welfare for a long time afterward, as the child will be weakened by his studies. Presumably his Torah observance will be weakened because it was premature. There are those who say that his friends will run after him in their studies and not catch him, i.e. the early start will enable him to be far more successful. This would be a child-by-child basis, right? I mean, some kids are ready to learn early and they can get that big head start. Others are just not ready and they're going to be totally turned off. You have to understand who you're dealing with. The Gemara comments, and both are correct. He will weaken physically and he will learn well. And if you wish, say that these two statements can be reconciled in a different way. This case is dealing with a weak child who should not be brought to school at such a young age, whereas that statement is referring to a healthy boy who can go to school at a tender age and succeed in his studies. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, in Usha, another law they instituted there, the sages instituted that in the case of a woman who sold her usufruct property, which is property that belongs to her, but whose produce belongs to her husband, if she sold it in her husband's lifetime, and then she died, the husband can repossess it from the purchasers of the land, the people who purchased it from her. And the Gemara relates, I guess because he had a right to the produce, even though that land was hers, and if there was a divorce, she would take that land with her when she leaves the marriage. The right to the produce was his, and so maybe she wasn't permitted to sell it, legally permitted to sell it during his lifetime, but she did anyway. And so in Usha, they decreed that the husband could repossess that land, but only after she dies. The husband can repossess it from the purchasers. And the Gemara relates, Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef found Rabbi Abahu standing among the congregation of Usha, and he said to him, who is the master who disseminated the law that was instituted in Usha? And he said to him, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. He learned it from Rabbi Abahu 40 times, and from that point onward, he remembered it so well that it seemed to him as though it were placed in his pocket. The Gemara discusses a point related to one of the ordinances from Usha. The verse states, happy are they who keep justice, who perform charity at all times, from Psalm 106, verse 3. But is it possible to perform charity at all times, right? So if the Psalm says, happy are they who are giving charity at all times, sounds nice, but must be a metaphor. Who can give charity at all times? Is one always in the presence of paupers, that there are people to give the charity to? Therefore, our rabbis in Yavne taught, and some say it was Rabbi Eliezer, this is referring to one who sustains his sons and daughters when they are minors. As stated above, He is not formally obligated to support them, although the sages will, embarrass him until he does support his children. But he's not formally obligated. And therefore, when he does so, it is a form of charity that he gives on a constant basis. Right? Raising children is a form of charity. But does not count as meiser. Right? When you're talking about giving away the 10th of your income, you can't spend it on your own children. It has to be spent on other people. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, this is referring to one who raises an orphan boy or an orphan girl in his house, takes care of them, and marries them off. Right. There, if you didn't formally adopt them and make them your children, but you supported this orphan all through his growing up, that would certainly be charity, and it would be a form of constant charity. The sages likewise expounded the verse from Psalm 112. Wealth and riches are in his house, and his charity endures forever. How can one's wealth and riches remain in his house while his charity endures forever? And Rav Huna and Rav Chisda disputed this issue. One said, this is referring to one who studies Torah and teaches it. He loses nothing of his own, while his charity toward others will endure because of their learning. And the other one said, this is one who writes scrolls of the Torah, the prophets and the writings, right? One who writes the whole Bible and lends them to others. The books remain in his possession, but others gain from his charity. With regard to the verse, and see your sons, peace be upon Israel, from Psalm 128. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, once your children have children of their own, there is peace upon Israel, as they will not come to require the ritual through which the Yavam frees the Yavama of her levirate bonds, chalitza, right? So once you have a child, then even if a man dies without having had a child, as we saw through our long journey in Tractate Yevamos, when a man dies childless but married, if he leaves a brother, then there's this whole issue of the brother needs to marry the widow, or they release each other through this ritual of chalitza. But it's all very unpleasant. Much better, you should have children, right? And so that's why you should get married young and start having children young and fulfill your obligation to reproduce, which we've talked about elsewhere. The law is that a Jewish man is obligated to have children until he has a son and a daughter. Beis Shammai say until he has 2 sons, but the law is once he has 2 kids, he has fulfilled his obligation. Okay, and Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, once your sons have sons, there will be peace upon the judges of Israel, as relatives will not come to quarrel with the judges over the inheritance. Pretty indirect way to create peace, but yes, when a man has his own heirs, through his own children, his cousins and uncles won't be arguing over who gets that inheritance. New subject. The Gemara returns to the Mishnah. This exposition was expounded by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah before the sages in the vineyard of Yavne. Just as the sons inherit only after the father's death, so too the daughters are sustained from his property only after the father's death, which was being used as a proof that a man is not obligated to support his daughter, in the sense that if he's not supporting her, the court won't step in and seize his assets, though they might threaten to excommunicate him or, make him stand in a public place and say, I'm a man who refuses to support my children, until he's embarrassed enough that he does so, right? So it's a mitzvah to support your kids, not necessarily an obligation that would lead the court to seize your assets if you don't do that. And it was based on this principle. Now we're in 50b. So the Gemara relates, Rav Yosef sat before Rav Hamnuna in the study hall, and Rav Hamnuna sat and said the following law. Just as sons inherit only from land, so too daughters are sustained only from land. When Rav Hamnuna taught this law, everyone clamored against him, i.e. all his listeners whispered their surprise to one another. Is it only one who leaves behind land whose sons inherit from him, whereas in the case of one who does not leave land, his sons do not inherit from him? Rav Hamnuna's statement indicates that sons inherit only land and nothing else, which is not the law. Rav Yosef said to Rav Hamnuna, perhaps the master was speaking of the marriage document ensuring the inheritance rights of a woman's male children, i.e. her son's rights to inherit the sum stipulated in her marriage contract, in addition to their share of the father's estate, alongside any other brothers. And Rav Hamnuna said to him, the master, who is a great man, knows what I said. In other words, yes, that was indeed my intention, while the others failed to understand me properly. We also have a teaching from the great sage Hillel. Do not say something that is easily misunderstood in the hopes that it will eventually be understood, because it will not be understood. Right? Being understood is, the obligation is on you to speak clearly. People will always misunderstand what we're saying, even when we speak clearly. So go the extra distance to be as clear as possible. Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef said, Rav would sustain orphan girls with wheat, according to the Aliyah, if their fathers did not leave land for them. A dilemma was raised before the scholars. Was this sustenance that Rav provided in the form of a livelihood, i.e. a dowry so that they could marry? And what is the meaning of the term Aliyah? It means in keeping with the status, Iluya, of the father. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. As Shmuel said, with regard to the daughter's livelihood, i.e. their dowry, the court assesses the amount that they receive from their father's estate after his death in accordance with the temperament and social and financial status of the father. Right? So you don't have some kind of standard dowry amount set aside to sustain daughters, because the fact is the daughter of a rich man is accustomed to being kept in a different way than the daughter of a poor man. And presumably the estate of the rich man will be sufficient to support the daughter in the manner that she's accustomed to. Or perhaps it was actual sustenance, i.e. provisions so that they would have food. And what is the meaning of the term aliyah? It indicates that this law is one of the good statements said in the upper chamber, aliyah. As Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef said, when the sages sat in the upper chamber to rule on certain laws, which they could not do in the study hall at that time due to the persecution by the Gentiles, they instituted that daughters should be sustained from movable property in addition to land. And the Gemara suggests, come and hear a resolution to this dilemma. In the possession of Rabbi Banai, the brother of Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, there was movable property that belonged to orphans, which were deposited with him by their father. And the orphan daughters came before Shmuel, who said to Rabbi Banai, go and sustain the daughters from the property. So they were being sustained from more, fungible assets, more liquid assets than just real estate. So what? Is it not correct to say that this means he should provide them with sustenance? And this would indicate that Shmuel holds, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, that the sages instituted an ordinance in the upper chamber that daughters are entitled to their sustenance even from the movable property. But the Gemara refutes this claim. No, there it is stated in reference to their livelihood. And Shmuel conforms to his standard line of reasoning. As Shmuel said, with regard to livelihood, i.e. the dowry granted to daughters from their father's estate, the court assesses the amount they receive in accordance with the status of the father, but not necessarily for their sustenance. So the Gemara relates, there was an incident of this kind that came before the court in Nehardea. And the judges of Nehardea ruled that the daughters must be supported from the movable property that their father had left. And likewise a case occurred in Pumbedisa. And Rav Chana Bar Bizna collected the sum from the movable property. And Rav Nachman said to the judges, go reverse your decisions, and if not, I will collect your houses from you in order to compensate those you ruled against. You were trying to create an equitable outcome, but maybe you had no legal basis to do so. And the Gemara further relates, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi thought to issue a ruling requiring a man's heirs to sustain his daughters from the man's movable property. And Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said to them, this is a matter about which Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish did not take action, i.e. they did not issue a ruling to this effect. Will you now take action in this regard? If those great sages were not sure enough of the law to issue a practical ruling, how can you do so? And you see that there's a real reluctance, even though it sounds good, sounds like it'll be an equitable outcome, sounds like, poor people will be taken care of. You can't just, issue these kinds of decrees because it sounds good to you. Either they have a legal basis or they do not. And you can very easily fall, into the situations of unexpected outcomes. unexpected consequences that are far worse than the equitable result you're trying to arrange. So the Gemara relates, Rabbi Elazar thought to issue a ruling requiring a man's heirs to sustain his daughters from his movable property. And Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim said before him, my teacher, I know about you that you are not acting according to the letter of the law, but rather out of pity for these daughters who have no other source of support. However, you should still not do this, lest the students observe and mistakenly establish the law accordingly for future generations. A certain person came before Rav Yosef to inquire about this matter. And Rav Yosef said to the sons of the deceased man, give the daughter her sustenance from the dates that are laid out to dry on the mats. These fruits are certainly movable property. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, if it was a creditor who came to collect the debt, would the master give him the right to collect it in this manner? Even a creditor who may collect his claim by repossessing property that the debtor has sold cannot take movable property from the possession of orphans. A daughter who cannot collect her sustenance from property that her father sold should certainly not have the right to collect her sustenance from the movable property that belongs to her brothers, the male orphans. They're orphans too. Now, you might pressure the orphans to sustain their sister, but you can't just seize their assets. That's the difference. So Rav Yosef said to Abaye, I did not mean actual dates lying on the mats. Rather, I spoke of ripe dates ready for plucking, which are fit for mats. Since they are still attached to the ground, they are not considered movable property. Now we're on 51a. We're going to go just a little bit into it, and then we'll knock off, getting a little head start on tomorrow. But if you have questions or comments, get them in now. Abaye asked him, ultimately, anything that is about to be sheared is considered sheared, and therefore these dates should already be classified as movable property from which her sustenance cannot be collected. And Rav Yosef replied, I spoke of a case when the fruit is nearly fully ripe, but it is still in need of the palm tree. Since they are attached to the ground, they may be used for the daughter's sustenance. And the Gemara relates, there was a certain minor orphan boy and an orphan girl who came before Rava. And Rava said to the trustees of the father's estate, increase the amount you give to the orphan boy so that there should be enough for the orphan girl as well. And the sages said to Rava, but it was the master who said that one may collect from land but not from movable property, whether for sustenance, whether for the marriage contract, or whether for the daughter's livelihood. In this case, only movable property was available. And Rava said to them, if this orphan wanted a maidservant to serve him, would we not give him one? The court would use his father's property to fund this acquisition. All the more so here where there are two factors, as she is his sister, and she will serve him well. It is therefore appropriate to act in this manner, which is to the benefit of both the boy and the girl. And that's what we'll knock off today. Tomorrow we'll continue on page 51. Just a quick note about upcoming classes. Tomorrow's Friday, so we have our class at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Saturday night, we'll have it, a little while after Shabbat ends here in LA. I suspect I'll be able to get on the air by about 9 p.m. Sunday night, no class. I'm going to another wedding, even while Nina's away. Very different kind of wedding. The one last Sunday, was a young couple that's getting started in life. And the one this Sunday is a good friend of mine, my age, having a second marriage later in life. But you celebrate with the bride and groom whenever you're given that opportunity. So I won't be able to teach the class Sunday night, and we'll do a double page on Monday. Okay. Sharon, didn't Rabbi Akiva's wife support their children while he was off studying? And for a long time. And she worked her butt off, even though she was the daughter of a very rich man, because he cut her off when she married this, no-account shepherd who she, saw in him what her father did not see in his prospective son-in-law, that her husband would be a Torah giant, right? Perhaps the greatest rabbi ever, second only to Moses. But yes. Okay. Seeing some longer notes here. Let's see if I can read this and address it. John, you asked, this is a question from some time ago, if stoning, like the biblical death penalty of stoning, is not actually throwing rocks at a person, but rather throwing him off a cliff. And if it says in the Bible, in the Torah, that for certain punishments you shall be stoned at the door of someone's house, or at the gate of the court, or at the gate of the city, well, that's not where the cliff is. So how do you accomplish the stoning? And what it might be is that's where they pass the judgment and begin the procession to the cliff. But I'm not sure. I didn't have an answer for that. Sharon says, my father said in Poland in the cheder, meaning the elementary school for Torah learning, they started learning Torah at age 3 and Rashi at age 5. And that's the idea, right? That when a child is 3, you start showing him the alphabet, but you make it sweet for him, right? So in very traditional Jewish communities, the boys don't get a haircut until they're 3 years old. And when they get that first, and so they often have very long hair, and then at their 3rd birthday, they cut the hair. That's called an ushperin, and they start to look at the letters of the Hebrew alphabet with a piece of candy on each letter, so that their first experience of Torah should be sweet. And in fact, in our minyan, it's probably not so healthy, but same idea, to make the experience of going to synagogue sweet for the little kids. There's a guy whose job it is to hand out candy to the little kids, so they have a sweet experience in shul. Okay, that's what I've got for today, unless there's a question on the YouTube side. Right, exactly. Your comments are accurate, that if you give away too much charity, you can become the one who needs charity, and that's one of the reasons they advise against it. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, for page 51. Have a great night.